The VCSE Barometer Survey. The sector's regular temperature check. Informed by VCSE organisations for VCSE organisations nationwide. Unlock insights for impact.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming this morning to hear about our latest wave of the barometer. For those of you who don't know, then the VCSE Barometer is designed to be a quarterly temperature check of the voluntary community social enterprise sector. It began in its quarterly form in November 2022, but actually began initially in September 2020. So this is sort of our 5th birthday now, which we've been trying to track what's happening to the voluntary community social enterprise sector over time. We work with a number of national organisations who help shape the questions, and the aim is to help policymakers and practitioners have real-time evidence to help understand this sector. This is wave 11 that was run between the 16th of July and the 13th of August this year, and had 474 participants. We focused on data, which we'll say a little bit more about in a moment. If you go on to the next slide. So we've got a number of quite exciting, we think, developments to the barometer and what we're doing, particularly trying to hopefully make it as useful as possible for you and also give things back. So my colleague Ganesh is going to talk you through this, but when we kicked off the barometer originally, one of my colleagues we were working with from NCVO said, well, what do organisations that fill it in get back? And I couldn't really answer that question, but we now can, because we've got our individualised reports. So Ganesh is going to just give you a little run through of some of these things that we are developing. Ganesh, over to you.
Yeah, morning, and as Daniel mentioned, so we have been working on the dashboard, a completely upgraded look of the dashboard, which is more functional and it's easy to use. So some of the core things that we're keeping in mind is to have the simplicity of this dashboard. Everyone can use it and it's relatively straight. I can just start with our official website, which yeah, I'm not sure if you guys can see my screen.
Do you want me to stop? I'll stop sharing for a second.
Yeah.
The classic technical hitch as we present some technology, which always makes these things much more exciting.
There we go. You should be able to share now. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. All right. So this is our website, which is completely upgraded, and everyone can have a look at this website. So under the project section, we have been working on multiple projects. So the 2 projects which we would like to highlight within this presentation are the individualized report. Those who have signed up for the individualized report would have received a copy of these, but I would like to just give you guys a quick look. So we have tried to incorporate all the feedback that we have received from every one of you. So one common feedback was being able to compare it amongst other organizations with the same size. So that is something which we included. And this report is structured in a way that there are 4 major sections to it. One is the key concerns that every organization face, and then about your service demand and the financial position, and finally what actions other organizations have taken. Upon toggling this to similar size, each organization is classified as large, small, or medium, and you would be able to see your response in comparison with other organizations of your similar size. So this is our individualized report. And now moving on to the dashboard, that is again present on our link, which is this one. So we have been working for it, and this is still in development. There are some sections of it which we are trying to add. As of now, this has most features available except for the trends at this point. So we are trying to integrate our database to have all the waves that we have taken so far, so that it can give you a better understanding of how things have changed across the last 10 waves. So apart from the trends page, every other page is being sectioned, and we are still working on more functionality and more graphs and better insights in the coming days. So this would be updated on regular basis, and we would be sending you notifications over email on what are the new things that are coming up. And to keep things easy, I can just give a quick walkthrough, which is we have the filter section here. And within the filter section, you have an option to choose the size, the area of operation, location, and the main activities of the organization. And finally, the survey wave. You would notice that it has only 2 waves as of now, but very soon we would have a lot of other waves, which is from wave 1 to 9 2. And once that has been completely integrated, you would be able to see the trends page where you can compare different metrics across all waves. So we would encourage you to have a look of it. This can be seen as a much more upgraded version of the individualized report. So any feedback that you have with respect to this is something which Ben can share on the chat, the feedback form. If you have any features, any requests with respect to this dashboard or the individualized report, feel free to let us know, and we would like to have that iterative way where we upgrade things. Over to Ben.
Just to say then, yes, so you've seen there we've created the individualized reports, which is designed to try to give you something back for those of you that filled it in, and we're developing up the new version of the dashboard as well. I've put in a link to our email address in the chat, so be very keen for any comments or feedback, or if you'd like to talk to us as well and you'd rather just have a verbal conversation. We really want to make these as useful and interesting and relevant as possible as well. And thank you those of you that said some kind words in the chat as well around these things. So yeah, that gives us some of the developments that we've been working on. We're always trying to improve and develop these things as we go through. Should we go to the next slide? So Ben's going to talk us through some of the key concerns and what's happened over the most recent wave.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Just to say on the dashboard, so I know that we present these core questions every wave, and a lot of what we get is kind of very similar. Hopefully in time for wave 12, which will be launching in October, we'll have a trends-based view of the past few years. So what you'll be able to do is you'll be able to see how things like this has changed. You know, the top 3 concerns have changed over the past sort of 10 to 11 waves, which will hopefully be useful. But for now, yeah, as Daniel said, I'm just going to walk you through the findings for the core questions for wave 11. So no surprise there, income generation is the primary concern for just over 3/4 of organisations. This is down 2% from wave 10, but roughly it kind of hovers between 75 and 80%. And this has been the case kind of since the first wave of the barometer. Increase in demand for services. This is down 4% from wave 10. So just over 2 in 5 organisations said increase in demand is a top 3 concern. And volunteer recruitment, just under 2 in 5 said that's a key concern. And that's up 6% from wave 10 and up 1% from wave 9. Inflation of goods and services, again, this kind of swaps around with volunteer recruitment between number 3 and 4. This is up 1% from wave 10 and up 7% from wave 9. So the increase in costs of goods and services is continuing to be an issue. So over the past 3 months, 63% of organisations have said that the service demand has increased, and this is up 1% from wave 10, but down 3% from wave 9. 30% have said that service demand has stayed the same, which is down 2% from wave 10, but up 2% from wave 9. And again, very few people say that service demand has decreased. For the next 3 months, it's a similar picture. 61% expect service demand to increase over the next 3 months, although this is a drop of 4% from wave 10, a drop of 11% from wave 9. So slightly lower expectations in terms of service demand increasing. In terms of expectations about meeting demand over the next 3 months, in terms of being able to meet demand, the majority say that they expect to meet it, so 55%, just over half, but with limited capacity. Only 1 in 10 organisations expect to meet demand with significant spare capacity over the next 3 months. 1 in 4 expect to fall slightly short. and 8% expect to fall significantly short. So this outlook seems to be improving a little bit compared to previous two waves, with slightly fewer organisations expecting substantial increases in demand and slightly more organisations expecting to meet demand and fewer expecting to fall short, but only slight adjustments there. In terms of the financial position over the past and the next 3 months, so the top bar there shows the experiences over the past 3 months in terms of financial position. The bottom bar shows expectations for the next 3 months. And as you can see there, 26%, just over one in four, said that the financial position improved, but mainly improved a little over the past 3 months. The highest proportion said that the financial position had stayed the same, and more than 1 in 3 said that it had deteriorated, but again, deteriorated a little as opposed to a lot. And this is down 3% from wave 10 and 4% down from wave 9. So maybe a few people moving from the deteriorated a little position to the stay the same position. Again, fairly similar for the next 3 months, just over 1 in 4 expecting their financial to improve slightly over the next 3 months, but the majority again staying, suggesting that it will stay the same. So in terms of rising costs, 67%, 2 in 3, said that their financial position had deteriorated due to rising costs, which is down 2% from wave 10 and the same as wave 9. And it's usually around 2 in 3 that said their financial position has deteriorated due to rising costs. So over the past sort of 3 waves of the barometer, half of organisations have told us that they've had to unexpectedly use financial reserves as a result of rising costs, and 2 in 5 have increased service prices in response to rising costs. And I think this illustrates the increasing proportion of organisations citing the increasing price of goods and services as a key concern. Just under 1 in 3 have told us that volunteer responsibilities and/or hours have increased due to rising costs as well. So some of those responsibilities, I think, maybe as a result of things like national insurance changes, rising national living wage, increased staff redundancy, some of those responsibilities are then shifting to volunteers. In terms of the change in personnel numbers over the past 3 months, again, very similar to previous waves, and most of the activity here kind of falls either within stayed the same or very slight increases on either side. Most organisations report an unchanged position in terms of staff and volunteer numbers, or a slight increase or decrease. You can kind of tell yourself, you can tell by yourself there. So the top bar chart there is the volunteers, the bottom one is paid staff. So this is something that we changed in the past few waves, just to kind of differentiate between recruitment difficulties between paid staff and volunteers. And as you can see there, the main challenges for organisations is with volunteers as opposed to paid staff, and just over half said that they're experiencing recruitment difficulties with volunteers, which is up 7% from wave 10. Paid staff, slightly less so, just over a quarter experiencing recruitment difficulties with paid staff. And in terms of the consequences of recruitment difficulties, sort of in keeping with the responses due to rising costs there in terms of volunteer responsibilities, volunteers working increased hours, almost half said that that's a consequence of recruitment difficulties. And this is 4% higher than wave 10, so this has been a steady increase. In addition to that, employees are working increased hours. So 2 in 5 said that the employees are working increased hours as a result of recruitment difficulties. And just over 1 in 3 have said they've had to pause some operations as a result of that. And 1 in 4 have said that they've been unable to meet service demand as a result of this. This is the same as wave 10, but it is 9% lower than what people said in wave 9. So maybe a slight improvement there. So back over to you, Daniel, if you just want to speak a little bit about the ESRC project in terms of data and evidence.
Just to also just say then, in terms of the picture that Ben's just presented about what's been happening over the last quarter, it seems like quite stable in terms of the situation and the challenges, and we will have an opportunity a little bit later then to do have a discussion around that, and we'd love to have people's thoughts and feelings around that. But each wave, for those of you who don't know, we focus on one particular topic as well, and this time we were looking at the role of data and the voluntary sector. And this comes out of a project that we've been running, funded by the ESRC, that's the Economic and Social Research Council, in collaboration with some partners that you can see on the slide there, about how can we unlock the enormous sort of and really important levels of information and insights that the voluntary sector routinely captures, including evaluations and monitoring and surveys and different forms of research, and turn that into data that can be used for social science purposes. And this slide sort of captures what the project overall is about, but we're going to talk you through what's happening in the barometer. So if you could just click on, Ben, to the next slide. So really what we've been looking at in this quarter for the barometer is around how organisations deal with and respond to data and evidence, what their challenges are and what the opportunities are around some of that as well. It reflects some of the wider research that others have done, and I've seen we've very pleased to have people from Data Orchard on the call as well, and I'm sure they'll have some interesting things to say in the discussion. But you can see in this then that 4 out of 5 organisations say that capacity is a main barrier to effective use of data and evidence, which I think is particularly something we've thought about in terms of organisation size. Half of organisations said that they don't have dedicated time for data collection, analysis and reporting, and help or named take part in that. Lots of information there around how do people engage with different types of outside influences, so using executive summaries and infographics and case studies. So I think quite a lot of that is getting information in quick and easy rather than reading long reports as well. Some information there about the types of networks and information that people get their data through. And we found overall that small organisations are less likely to collect, use and share data, but it doesn't mean that they don't. It's just obviously the capacity they've got to do that. And Ben's going to dive into some of these things, and then Juliana and I are going to respond to some of this, and then we'll open it up to discussion as well. So Ben, do you want to just talk us through some of the findings?
Yeah, sure. So just to quickly run through some of these, because I know that some of them can be a little bit overwhelming. So this chart here is about a question that we asked around how organisations collect and use data and evidence. And so each of the bars is a statement which organisations responded to in terms of the extent to which they agree or disagree. So in green is agree, in red is disagree. And really the kind of the main finds here in terms of agreements is that 70% or more organisations agree that they regularly collect and use data about their impact and services, and 70% or more organisations are confident both in the quality of the data and evidence that they use and in their ability to use it. 70% or more also agree that they actively use data and evidence to inform their work, and that they share data and evidence with others. But as Daniel said, there's a few disparities there in terms of organisation size, both in terms of usage, in terms of formats, and in terms of data sharing. On the other hand, around half disagree that they have sufficient time, skills, and capacity to make effective use of data and evidence. And around half disagree that they regularly collect and use volunteer data to measure involvement or to inform recruitment and retention. And the key points about size here are that for most questions or most of these statements across here, smaller organisations were slightly less likely to agree with these statements. However, they did provide similar responses in terms of their confidence around the quality of the data that they use and the use about regular collection, about their impact, about the services. And I guess my view here in this kind of is reflected in the rest of the slides as well, is that you know, organizations of different sizes use data and evidence for different reasons, and therefore the required capabilities and capacity, I guess, for smaller organizations will be different. So if they're doing less with it, the required capacity and capabilities will be lower than in larger organizations. So they might still be confident because they don't have to do as much with it. But yeah, we'll kind of talk about that as we go along. So this slide here is about organizations' current capacity to collect and use data effectively. Again, the same setup. In green, you've got agree. In red, you've got disagree. So in terms of the strengths here, 3 and 4 agreed that they've got people with the skills to analyze and interpret data and evidence. 2 and 3 agree that they've got the confidence when using evidence to inform work. And just under 2 and 3 said that data and evidence were embedded into planning and decision making. On the other side, in terms of you know, weaknesses, I guess you could call them, capacity again is the main issue. So almost half disagree that time is allocated specifically for data collection, analysis, and reporting. More than 2 and 3, 69%, say they don't have access to external support, and almost half strongly disagree with that statement. And almost half don't agree that they have a dedicated person responsible for data-specific tasks. And interestingly, the likelihood of having a dedicated person responsible for data and evidence declined as organization size increased. And normally you'd think if you've got a larger organization, they'd be more likely to have a dedicated person for those tasks. I guess more in keeping with what we'd expect, smaller organizations less likely to have access to software and systems needed for data collection and analysis, and also less likely to allocate time to data collection, analysis, and reporting, which maybe ties in with what I was saying earlier in terms of they don't need as much capacity given they might be doing less than larger organizations. So this is just one example of splitting it up by size, just illustrating that smaller organizations generally allocate less time to data collection, analysis, and reporting. And as I said before, this is kind of a theme that is reflected throughout some of these findings. One thing that our survey doesn't capture is, you know, why this is, but I think we can kind of make inferences, like I was saying before, that larger organizations might have more requirements to funders, etc., and therefore have to do more with data and evidence. So this chart here shows the top 3 barriers to effective use of data and evidence by organization size. And by far the biggest barrier for organizations of all sizes is limited capacity. Interestingly, for small organizations, again in keeping with what I was saying before, is 2 and 5 said that there's just no internal demand, and that was a barrier to effective use of data and evidence. High costs hinder the effective use for medium and large organizations, and as organization size increases, so does the proportion of organizations that cite a lack of skills or confidence as a barrier for effective use. Again, this might illustrate the additional requirements placed on larger organizations based on what they actually have to do with data and evidence compared to maybe what smaller organizations are doing with it. So this chart here shows why organizations use data and evidence, and organizations could select as many as they wanted. And they use it for a number of reasons, unsurprisingly, to support funding applications, to plan and improve services, and to monitor and evaluate service delivery. In contrast, fewer use data and evidence for workforce-related matters, things like volunteer wellbeing, staff wellbeing. Interestingly, advocacy and policy influence is also down here, and things like monitoring and evaluating volunteer involvement. And what we found when we dug into this a little bit deeper was that medium and large organizations tended to use data and evidence for a variety of different purposes, and small organizations cited on average 2 fewer reasons. So they selected around 2 fewer of these compared to medium and large ones for using data and evidence. So what this chart shows is the top 3 selections in 2 different questions that we asked. The first one was where organizations primarily find and access data and evidence, and the second one was their preferred formats of when they use data and evidence. And what we found was organizations are most likely to find and access data through membership networks, newsletters or bulletins, and local infrastructure organizations. I guess these are more familiar, low cost and accessible routes that maybe don't require specialist knowledge or additional resource. In contrast, what we found was that more costly options, such as consultants, for example, are used less frequently, potentially linking back to that argument around high costs. So only 13% said that they find and access data through consultants or evaluators. Our findings also indicate that organizations prefer formats of data and evidence that is clear and easy to digest. So executive summaries, top of the list there, infographics and visuals, and case studies are the most popular formats. And again, this reflects, I think, a strong preference for accessible insights that can be quickly applied. In contrast, again, formats requiring significant analysis, so things like raw data or full research reports, are used by significantly fewer. So less than 1 in 5 prefer using raw data, and less than 1 in 3 prefer using full research reports. Circling back to the primary barriers, capacity, lack of skills and confidence, and high costs. I think having evidence that is easy to digest and highly accessible, both in terms of where it's from, the costs, and within the workforce's capabilities, is important. And as expected, larger organizations, in contrast to small and medium organizations, were more likely to use more formal or technical approaches, such as through academic partners or preferences for things like analytic platforms. So I just want to pause there for a second and bring in Daniel and Juliana just for some comments around, I guess, things like capacity, the barriers, and accessibility. You've got any reflections?
Juliana, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Daniel. I think this result of the barometer also compared with our work with the ESRC project. So we have done 70 in-depth interviews to the sector, and we were talking with organizations who use data regularly, or who train voluntary sector organizations in using data. And one of the things is that, and the barometer survey gives us the reflection of the small organizations, how they are using data. And it seems that data is used for a purpose. So the data is used for doing a report. Usually it is to say something to the funders, either for a funding application or an impact report. So there is a limited use of the data that the organization had. And what we've seen is that maybe the organization hasn't got, a small and medium organization haven't got time to reflect on what this data says to make, strategic decisions, or to understand better what they wanted to do in the next steps of an organization. also, I think is that the data is built for this purpose, but not we haven't seen often in organizations like organizational data culture. So it's not embedded in the organizational strategy. It's just to do something, just to get an information of something, but not as the data is not driven the organization strategies. That is my first reflection. If you want to add something, Daniel.
Yeah, no, I just think that last point is really salient as well. So it feels as though lots of organisations are sort of satisfied, they can use the data and evidence that they need, but actually, is there more that could be done to really embed that data culture and become more mature and develop it up over time as well? And that might be one of the things we can open up to the discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so moving on, and in keeping with the formats used, in terms of publicly available and secondary data use, organisations overall reported moderate use of publicly available data. And this was, as you can see here, substantially more prevalent among medium and large organisations. So this is the top 3 selections cut by organisation size. You can see here for medium and large, national statistics, such as the ONS, are at the top of the list for medium and large organisations, whereas 2 in 5 small organisations said that they don't use secondary data or evidence. And when you compare this figure to medium and large, it's substantially more. So 13% medium organisations, which is 1 in 8, said that they don't use secondary data or evidence, and 1 in 13, 8%, large organisations said that they don't use secondary data or evidence. And for many secondary data sources, such as national statistics, around twice the proportion of medium and large organisations said that they use secondary data compared to small. And yeah, as I said, of these, they mostly use national statistics, indices of multiple deprivation, local authority data is on there as well, and charity commission data, possibly reflecting their broader areas of operation. So this chart here shows the concerns about sharing data and evidence with others, and I thought it'd be useful to bring this in before we talk about what organisations share and who they share it with. And one of the main concerns or challenges is complying with data protection regulation, and this was the top concern among all organisation sizes. And I think the added responsibilities and requirements around GDPR might also help to explain the second one on there, which is why half of organisations said that they lack the capacity to prepare data for sharing. Almost half of organisations are worried about how their data and evidence will be interpreted by others, and potentially have concerns with how it will be framed, particularly if it would negatively impact things like reputation. So more than a quarter of small organisations said that they don't share any data or evidence with others, which is substantially higher than medium and large organisations. So 6% of medium and 4% of large organisations said that they don't. However, we do have to factor in the requests for sharing. So almost 2 in 5 small organisations have never been asked to share, compared to only 1 in 7 medium and large organisations. So in terms of the types of data and evidence that is shared by organisations, again, this chart here, in the red, in the dark red, it shows we don't share and we will not share. In the pink, it shows we don't share, but we're willing to share. In the light green, it shows share occasionally. And in the dark green, it shows share regularly. And we also have another option, which is not applicable, which suggests that organisations don't hold this type of data to share. So the theme around limited capacity, I think, combined with organisations' preferences for accessibility, means that organisations more frequently share formats that they prefer. So things like case studies, things like executive summaries, and things like infographics and visuals. And more technical formats like raw data and interactive tools are shared by fewer than 1 in 8 organizations. And similarly, formats that might be more costly or resource intensive or just less preferred or used by organizations are less likely to be shared. So as I said before, organizations we've got this not applicable options, and they're also more likely to select not applicable for these options. So ones that they don't use or don't prefer, then they don't have it to share, which makes sense. And so in keeping with the theme of increased data-related activities with increasing organization size, so medium and large organizations are more likely to use data and evidence. At least 2 in 5 small organizations marked each of these data and evidence types as not applicable, suggesting that they don't have it to share. And this percentage grew further with more complex and time-consuming data sources, such as the full research reports, the raw data, the interactive tools, and that's where around 2 in 3 or more small organizations marked them as not applicable. And this was compared to around 1 in 3 medium and large organizations. So in terms of who they share their data with, again, the response options are the same as the last one. In the dark red, we've got don't share and won't share. The pink, we've got don't share but willing to, share occasionally, and share regularly. And so our findings suggest that data sharing is most embedded where there are established relationships or requirements. So, for example, with funders or commissioners, with local authorities, with partner organizations. And what we did find as well was that organizations are more likely to share data and evidence with local infrastructure organizations compared to national infrastructure organizations, only slightly. And the lowest level of sharing was with national public bodies. Having said that, around 2 in 5 organizations would be willing to share with these groups. So, it could be that they haven't been asked to share, they don't have the type of data that's required to share, but there is a willingness there to share. Organizations also seem to be more open with public-facing sharing, with more than half sharing with service users and the general public as well. So just a few reflections, then I'll bring Daniel and Juliana in again, because obviously I've mentioned a few things about organisation size there, but I don't think that these differences by organisation size should necessarily imply a lack of interest in data. I think that smaller organisations are often closest to communities, but often have the least time and resource to invest. And I think limited capacity means that smaller organisations maybe focus on service delivery first, leaving less scope to embed more complex data practices. And I think that the finding around no internal demand might reflect the pressure of those day-to-day pressures, rather than a lack of recognition for the data's value. In the long run, not using data might cost organizations more in time and money, and it can be useful for small organizations, but there needs to be some capacity building and capability building support there to help organizations realize the benefits of data and evidence without detracting from service delivery. So Daniel and Juliana, I don't know if you've got any additional reflections that you want to add.
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones, because I'd like to actually open it up for discussion as well, because we haven't got too much time. So yeah, I think it's really interesting about organizations' willingness to share. That seems to be one of the most interesting elements. And actually, yeah, nearly 80% of organizations seem willing to share data, but also the fear around GDPR and what does it mean to be able to share, and the ethics and legal responsibilities and things like that becoming a barrier seems very interesting. And maybe and understandably, organizations are more likely to share with organisations they've got existing relationships with. But even so, that's still relatively marginal to the overall desire to or willingness to share. Strikes me as quite interesting for things. I don't know if you've got any other quick reflections, because I'd like to actually give us time to have a discussion.
Just a very simple reflection is that from our interviews with policymakers, what they need is, this local insight. So maybe to think that a small and medium organizations have power on their local data, because policymakers needs to understand what happens in their localities, So just flipping it around, like this data is needed as well for making, policy decisions.
So yeah, but if maybe we take down the slides, we could put our contact details in the chat.
See where you are in the big picture. Stay ahead of the curve. Join a community of changemakers. Amplify your voice. Drive collaboration and innovation. Sign up for the survey, have your say, and influence action where it counts for you. Your input matters.